of greater attention than the 10 years which preceded it. The Central Intelligence Agency, the main arm of the intelligence community, has been at the center of a host of high-profile and controversial counterterrorism and national security issues, ranging from surveillance, detention, enhanced interrogation, to the use of warfare by remotely piloted vehicles or drones. It's my pleasure to now introduce our speaker for tonight, himself a native Buckeye, for what I think is going to be a special treat. Mr. Michael Morell is a career officer with over 30 years with the Central Intelligence Agency. Prior to his retiring just earlier this year, he served the CIA in a number of senior positions, including a 3-year stint as Deputy Director, the #2 slot, and 2 terms as Acting Director. He previously served as the intelligence briefer to President George W. Bush, as Chief of Staff to the staff that produces the President's daily brief, and as Executive Assistant to the CIA Director George Tenet. He also directed analysis at the National Counterterrorism Center, and spent 2 years as the head of the agency's Directorate of Intelligence, which does analysis. He'll be speaking tonight, as you know, on the importance of intelligence to national security, and following remarks, we'll take questions at these 2 microphones here tonight. I'll just say 2 things before I turn it over to Mr. Morell. First, you can't get to be the main analysis guy at the CIA unless you do your homework. He showed up at King today wearing a Kenyan purple tie. So that really reflects the first thing. Secondly, I really want to thank him for his generosity of time. He spent all afternoon meeting with Kenyan students in small groups and taking a lot of questions. So thank you, sir, for your time. So all of you, please join me in giving Mr. Morell a warm Kenyan welcome.
Good evening. It is great to be in my home state of Ohio. It's great to be here at Kenyon College. I had a terrific day today. I'd say an intellectually stimulating day, interacting with some really amazing students here. So I think I was actually the beneficiary of those conversations. Let me tell you a secret. I took my son, who is now a freshman in college, on the vast majority of his college visits when he was a junior in high school. We went to many places, but one of those places was right here at Kenyon. I will tell you that of all the places that we visited, this is the place that I would have chosen to go to school. Really. I found myself going through the course catalog, figuring out exactly what my 4 years here would look like. So now I'm back. I'm here, which is why I wore the purple tie. Let me start by thanking Tom for that very kind introduction, and let me also start by making one thing clear. There is a big difference between the CIA of the movies and the real CIA. First, the fiction. So in the movies, senior CIA officials are played by dashing, rugged men like Harrison Ford, Alec Baldwin, and James Earl Jones. So now the reality. About 2 years ago, I got a rather short haircut, and I walked through my front door, and my teenage daughter took one look at me and said, "Dad, you look like Forrest Gump." So tonight, no Harrison Ford. I'll also tell you that when Catherine Bigelow and Mark Bull came to the agency in the aftermath of the Bin Laden raid and said that they were going to make Zero Dark 30, that I went home that evening and I told my wife all about meeting Catherine and Mark and about this movie. I finished by telling her that I wanted Matt Damon to play me in the movie. She got this funny look on her face and said, "Honey, I love you, but Matt Damon is going to be a Navy SEAL." So you see how much respect I get at home. Okay, let me really begin by saying that what I would like to do tonight is say a few words about the business of intelligence. I'd also like to talk about the role of CIA. And in doing so, I want to talk about some of my own experiences, and I want to talk about CIA officers and their deep commitment to confronting our nation's most critical national security challenges. Then I'll answer as many questions as you would like, if I can. And if I can't, I'll tell you if I can't. But I think we'll be able to answer most of them. I'll start by making 2 points that I think are quite powerful. The first point is that the number of significant national security issues facing our country has never been greater than it is today. Just think of what the President and his national security team face every day. International terrorism, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, cyber espionage and warfare, the wind down of the war in Afghanistan, countries like Iran and North Korea, where the regimes are adversaries of the United States, critically important countries like Iraq, Mexico, Pakistan, and now Syria, who face long-term security challenges. Enduring challenges like Russia and China, where whether they ultimately become threats to the United States will depend on policies in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. And of course, profound change in what I would argue is the most important place on the planet, the Middle East. I could go on, but I think the point is clear. The sheer number of critically important issues is staggering. The Cold War has been replaced by the Blizzard Wars. Second, nearly all of the issues that I just listed are first and foremost intelligence issues. That's not an overstatement. Intelligence is at the heart of nearly every national security challenge facing our nation today. Whether you're talking about terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, drug trafficking, or cyber, good intelligence is at the foundation of our nation's approach to the world. Look at it this way. Any expert can use open sources to give you insight on the Eurozone crisis, Japanese politics, or Latin American perceptions of the United States. But not just any expert can give you a view on the status of the Iranian nuclear program, the North Korean missile program, or the current capabilities of Al-Qaeda to attack the homeland. Doing any of those things requires intelligence. The bottom line is that our nation's leaders cannot understand these issues, cannot make policy on these issues, and in many cases cannot carry out that policy without intelligence. So putting these 2 points together, the sheer volume of national security issues, and the fact that intelligence plays such a key role in addressing them, leads to what I think is a critical point. Intelligence has never been more important than it is today. The CIA's business is booming, more than at any time during my 33-year career, and I think more than at any time in the 66-year history of the agency. In short, it is a great time to be an intelligence officer. I will tell you that I occasionally give talks to corporate groups, and I tell them that if CIA were a for-profit company, they would want to invest in it. That's how good business is. So what is CIA's role in dealing with all of these issues? What does CIA actually do? CIA's job is to do 3 things. Steal secrets, make sense of those secrets for our nation's most senior leaders, and conduct covert action to influence events abroad. Let me touch on each one of those. So the first thing that CIA does is to collect information that others deliberately try to conceal. There are many ways to collect secrets. You're reading about them in the paper every day now. Satellites, intercepted communications, and the like. Sometimes the information that our country needs can be obtained only through a well-placed agent. That means a spy. That's where CIA comes in. CIA pays people, its sources, to spy, to pass us information, documents, hard drives, thumb drives, whatever. CIA pays these sources to spy on their country, their fellow terrorists, their fellow drug traffickers, to gather secret information on those who want to kill Americans or otherwise undermine our national security. Such human sources can make the difference between success and failure. Let me give you an example. In 2002, a source provided CIA information on the whereabouts of a guy named Abu Zubaydah, who was a senior Al-Qaeda operative. This information led to his capture. Information from Zubaydah helped lead to the capture of 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And that information helped disrupt a terrorist network in Southeast Asia that was plotting attacks against the U.S. homeland, actually plotting attacks against the west coast of the United States. In short, there is no substitute for what we in our business call human intelligence spies. The second thing that CIA does is all-source analysis. It's what I grew up doing. I often hear people describe the job with the metaphor, connect the dots. I never really liked that image. Why? Because we all remember the connect the dots games that we played as a kid, right? The dots were right there in front of you. In fact, they were numbered for you, right? They all went together one at a time. It was easy. Intelligence problems, on the other hand, are not easy. They're hard. In fact, CIA does not do easy. It only does hard. A much better metaphor for me for analysis is that of a puzzle. Think about putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle, and your job is to make a judgment about what's on the cover, but you don't have the box. It's missing. But this puzzle is a little bit different than most puzzles that you're used to dealing with. Although it's a 1,000-piece puzzle, you have 5,000 pieces with which to work. And not all of the 1,000 relevant pieces are there. So you have to sort out which pieces belong to that puzzle and which ones look like they belong to the puzzle, but really don't. And you have to make a judgment about what you are seeing with many of the relevant pieces missing. And you have to do this on a deadline because somebody important is waiting to make a decision, and that decision needs to be based on your judgment. That is what doing analysis is like. The puzzle pieces that analysts use are reports from CIA spies, intercepted messages that you're reading about in the paper, cables from embassies and defense attaches, satellite photos, and more types of technical collection than I am permitted to describe. They also include open source information, foreign media, social media, and the like. That's what makes the analysis what we call all source. The best example of all source analysis that I can give you is an analysis that never got done. It was the reason why the Central Intelligence Agency was created. I would love to take you to Hawaii to make real what I'm about to say. If I did, I would take you to Pearl Harbor, and I would have you face the water. And I would tell you to look to your right and face the notch in the mountains there. And I tell you that that is Kolokoli Pass, where on December 7th, 1941, Japanese Zeros streamed through, passed in front of where we would be standing, and attacked Fort Island, which would be to our left, where the Arizona Memorial now sits, and to which this day gives up pieces of the sailors and Marines that are still trapped inside. And I would tell you that this is what happens to a nation that has all the pieces of the puzzle, but doesn't have an all-source analytic capability to put them together. Like I said, that's why the CIA was created. Had there been a CIA, we would have saw the attack coming. The last thing CIA does is covert action. People in the CIA don't normally give speeches. And when they do, they don't talk about covert action, so I will be somewhat brief here. What is covert action? First, I'll tell you the legal definition, and I'll actually quote the statute. An activity or activities of the United States government to influence political, economic, or military conditions abroad, where it is intended that the role of the United States government will not be apparent or acknowledged publicly. End quote. There's more to the statute, but that is the essence of it. So what does that mean in practice? Think of it this way. Covert action is the third choice between diplomacy and military action. It includes anything from covert influence to paramilitary operations. CIA is the only organization in the United States government that has ever been authorized to conduct covert action. Every president that CIA has ever served has asked CIA to help implement foreign policy through covert action. You may know about some of the examples from the Cold War. CIA support for the Solidarity movement in Poland, and CIA support to the Afghan freedom fighters working to push the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. How many people here have seen Charlie Wilson's War? Well, Charlie Wilson's War is, for the most part, a true story. And what the story describes is classic covert action. And the kid in the movie who plays chess, that kid is one of my best friends today. And my kids think I'm cool because I know him. Let me add this about covert action. If you believe some of what you read, CIA conducts rogue covert actions, operations that no one else in Washington knows about. Nothing could be further from the truth. All covert action is undertaken at the written direction of the President. The written direction of the President. Nothing oral, written. It is approved by the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and many others. It is briefed to the intelligence committees in Congress, who provide rigorous oversight of all covert action. It is vetted with lawyers at the White House, the Department of Justice, and CIA's own General Counsel. Our nation has a rigorous oversight regime for covert action. This is important because CIA is a secret intelligence organization operating in a democracy, and it is very important that the American people have confidence that what CIA is doing is in accordance with our nation's laws and our nation's values. Let me now change direction a bit and talk about CIA and terrorism. Why? Because terrorism is still one of the top threats facing our nation today. CIA case officers collect intelligence on terrorist groups and their activities. CIA analysts assess what that intelligence means from both a tactical and a strategic perspective. And CIA officers work to undermine and degrade terrorist organizations. I want you to know that for CIA, the threat from terrorists is at the heart of what the agency does every hour of every day. It is CIA's top priority, given to us by the President of the United States. CIA has a very strong sense of urgency about this mission. And that sense of urgency is captured in a sign as you enter CIA's counterterrorism center. The sign, which is printed on a photograph of the collapsing World Trade Center towers, simply reads, "Today is September 12th, 2001. This is the perspective and the attitude that those officers bring to work every day. The fight against terrorism is a personal one for many CIA officers. And given the youth of the workforce, for many CIA officers, it has defined their entire career at the agency. For me personally, CIA's efforts in the global war against terrorism have shaped the last 15 years of my career. And it has done so in some very particular ways, and I want to share those with you. In 2001, I was serving as President Bush's intelligence briefer. Every morning, actually in the middle of the night, it's more like it, I would pull together all the intelligence materials from around the world to brief the President. It was my job to decide both what to show him and then how to brief it so that he took away key points. And I also provided the context in which he would hopefully understand what it was I was telling him. On 9/11, I was with the President in Florida. As I waited to brief him in the hallway outside his suite, American Airlines Flight 11 took off from Boston Logan's Airport. It was the first of the 4 hijacked planes to take to the air that day. From 8 to 8:30, I gave my briefing, discussing the key national security issues of the day with his President and his Chief of Staff, Andy Carter. As the briefing finished, but unknown to us at the time, the transponder on Flight 11 stopped transmitting its identification foe or friend. Along with others, I got in a van to follow the President to Booker Elementary School. During the 20-minute drive at just after 8:45, American Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Almost immediately, cell phones all over the van started ringing. Ari Fleischer, the President's press secretary at the time, turned to me and said, "Michael, do you know anything about a plane hitting the World Trade Center?" I said no, but I told him I'd make some calls. My assumption at that point, one that the President later told reporters that he shared, was that the crash was an accident. The image in my mind was of a small plane losing its way in bad weather and hitting the World Trade Center. That thought lasted only as long as it took me to contact the CIA Operations Center. The officer of the Operations Center with whom I spoke told me that the initial reports indicated that the plane was a large commercial jet. So my mental image of what happened started to unravel. As I ended the call and walked into a classroom where the President's senior staff was waiting for him in the adjoining classroom, United Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. It happened as the senior White House staff and I were watching television right in front of us. All of us, of course, in the room were stunned by what we saw, and now there certainly was no question at all this was a deliberate act of terrorism. I stayed with the President all day, through the uncertainty as news stories of the tragedy became more and more grim. The rest of the day became a very strange mixture of the intensity of doing my job and the surreal. First, the doing my job part. Early on in the crisis, a Palestinian terrorist group, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, had taken responsibility for the attack. The president asked me what I knew about the group. I told him that the group had a long history of terrorism against Israel, but that it did not have the capabilities to undertake what had just happened. Sometime later, the group withdrew its claim. On the flight from Barksdale Air Force Base to Louisiana to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, the president asked to see me alone. Only Andy Card joined us. The president said, "Michael, who did this?" I told him that I had not seen any intelligence that would speak to responsibility, and so what I was going to tell him was my personal view. He said he understood and asked me to continue. I told him that there are two terrorist states with the capability to do what we just saw, Iran and Iraq, but that both had nothing to gain and had plenty to lose by doing this. Rather, I said the culprit was almost certainly a non-state actor, and I said that I would bet my children's future that the trail would lead to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. The president then asked me, when will we know? I said, Mr. President, I can't say for sure. And I went on to review for him how long it took us to have any certainty of responsibility for the past attacks. The Khobar Towers attack in Saudi Arabia, the near simultaneous bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, and the attack on the USS Cole in Yemen. I told the president that we may know soon, and I told him that again, it could take some time. When I was done, I was rather surprised that I had committed to memory the history of the aftermath of all these previous strikes. Then the surreal. Not long after we took off from Sarasota, several of us were huddled in the senior staff compartment of Air Force One watching news reports of the unfolding tragedy. It was there that we watched people jump to their desks from the upper floors of the Twin Towers. And it was there that we watched the South Tower collapse and disappear into a plume of smoke. For several seconds, no one said a word. Then someone broke the silence by simply saying, "My God." And then, as we were on final approach to Andrews that evening, the president's military aide called me to one of the windows of Air Force One. He pointed to an F-15 flying alongside. He said it was from the D.C. Air National Guard and that there was another on the other wingtip. As I looked at the pilot in the F-15, I could see his facial features, and I could see him looking at us. I could also see the still burning Pentagon in the background. And for the first time that day, tears came to my eyes. In the immediate aftermath of the crisis, the sorrow turned to action. The immediate laser-like focus of our officers at all levels, from the most junior to the most senior. That immediate turn from grief to action is something that defines CIA as an agency. Agility is one of the great strengths of the Central Intelligence Agency. Officers worked 24 hours a day, sometimes not leaving the office for days at a time. People surged to the mission. Many volunteered without a second thought. The result was that we were at the tip of the spear in our nation's response to the attack. CIA officers were on the ground in Afghanistan working with the Northern Alliance against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda only 2 weeks after 9/11. That focus has never wavered in the years since. That focus led to the success of the bin Laden operation. Let me say a few words about the bin Laden operation because it is one of the few public illustrations of covert action. Like what we did in Afghanistan, it is classic covert action. And you may have heard there's even a movie about it. So how did we track down the world's most wanted man? Ever since 9/11, we had a systematic approach to trying to locate bin Laden. This involves several different avenues, and we followed every lead down every avenue. I can tell you that there were literally hundreds of leads. One of the avenues was to focus on Al-Qaeda's couriers, those folks who carry messages from one senior leader to another. And this is the avenue that happened to hit pay dirt. One courier in particular caught our attention. A few detainees identified him as one of the few couriers trusted by bin Laden. They identified him as a protege of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and as a trusted assistant of a guy named Abu Faraj al-Libi, who was at the time number 3 in Al-Qaeda, who was captured in 2005. A couple of the detainees even speculated that this is the kind of guy who could be living with bin Laden. We first learned about him in 2002. But at that point, we only had his Arabic name, the so-called non-Magur, Abu Ahmed. We did not know his true name. It took us 5 years to identify his true name. Then it took us 2 more years to identify his general location, somewhere in Pakistan. And another year to put eyes on him and follow him to where he lived. How we did each one of those 3 things could itself be a spy novel. While I can't tell you how we did those things, I can say a couple of things. It was hard, painstaking work. Many, many more failures than successes. It was hard because the detainees who knew Abu Ahmed best were trying to protect him by limiting what they told us, by trying to deceive us, or by simply denying that they ever knew him. And it was hard because Abu Ahmed and his brother, who was also living with him, were practicing extraordinary operational security. For example, they were living in Abbottabad in Alias, and they and their wives lied to their own extended families about where in Pakistan they lived. When we finally found the compound in August of 2010, a residence in Abbottabad, we were shocked. The compound sat on a large plot of land, roughly 8 times larger than the other homes in the area, and its physical security measures were extensive. It had 12 to 18-foot walls topped with barbed wire. Walls sectioned off different parts of the compound. Access to the compound was restricted by 2 security gates, and the residents burned their trash, unlike the other residents in the neighborhood who put their trash out for collection. The main structure, the main house on the compound, a 3-story building, had few windows facing the outside. And a terrace on the 3rd floor had a 7-foot privacy wall. You actually build terraces so you can look at the view. You don't build a wall to prevent you looking at the view. It was also noteworthy that while the property was valued at $1 million, the compound had no phone or internet service, unlike the neighbors. And the children in the compound did not go to school, unlike the other children in the neighborhood. When we found Abu Ahmed, we thought we would have to follow him to where he lived, and then we thought we'd have to follow him from there to where Bin Laden was. But the Abbottabad compound suggested immediately that Bin Laden might be there as well. We took all of this to the White House, along with a formal conclusion of my analysts that there was a strong possibility, exact words, strong possibility that Abu Ahmed was harboring Bin Laden at the compound. We made clear to the President that there was no direct evidence for this, only a circumstantial case. Then in the fall of 2010 came two additional pieces of information, and both of them strengthened that circumstantial case. First, we learned that a third family was living at the compound, one whose size and whose makeup matched the Bin Laden family members who we thought would be living with him at this point in his life. And we learned that this third family never left the compound, and we learned that none of the neighbors were aware that there was a third family there. And second, we learned that Abu Ahmed was still working for Al-Qaeda. This was a critical piece of the puzzle, confirming that a man that we knew had one time been a key facilitator for Bin Laden was still in the game. This ended one possibility we feared, that Abu Ahmed was no longer working for Al-Qaeda and was working for some drug dealer. Again, I can't tell you how we learned these two things, but think two more really cool spy stories. The rest of the story you know. The President made a decision to take action, and in the very early hours of Monday, May 2nd in Pakistan, still Sunday, May 1st in Washington, the United States killed the world's most wanted man, although I will tell you that I had quite a large lump in my throat when one of the two helicopters went down hard in the compound. Let me share with you a few specific moments from the Bin Laden operation. First, on April 29th, 2011, I was in Director Panetta's office when he received a phone call from Tom Donilon, then our country's national security advisor, telling us that the President had approved the operation. Sensing the significance of the moment, Director Panetta hand-wrote a note following the phone call. Let me read you that note because this is going to be in a museum someday. April 29, 2011, 10:35 a.m., memo for the record. Received phone call from Tom Donilon, who stated that the President made a decision with regard to AC-1, Abbottabad Compound 1, that's what we call it. The decision is to proceed with the assault. The timing, operational decision-making, and control are in Admiral McRaven's hands. The direction is to go in and get Bin Laden, and if he is not there, get out. These instructions were conveyed to Admiral McRaven at 10:45 a.m., signed Leon Panetta, Director, Central Intelligence Agency. Second little vignette. On the night of the raid, after all the work was done, Director Panetta and I walked out of the West Wing together to get in our SUVs going. It was well after midnight, but Lafayette Park, I think you remember, was filled with people. You'll remember that they were chanting USA, USA, USA. I even heard a few chants of CIA, CIA, CIA. Something I had never heard before and something I won't ever hear again. But I've never been prouder than I was at that moment. Let me close by talking about the heart and the soul of the CIA. The people who take on the mission of keeping us safe. The agency is blessed to have some of the most talented and dedicated officers anywhere in or outside of government. These officers work harder than anyone I've ever seen. I've had officers turn down well-deserved promotions or spend months or more away from their family because they believe so deeply in staying focused on an operation or on an initiative. Some of these officers have paid the ultimate price for their sense of duty. The most important place at CIA headquarters is on the Morell wall. 107 stars carved into the marble to commemorate those officers who have given their life in service to our country. Now, 107 does not sound like a lot compared to our military colleagues. But let me tell you, it is a huge number to a civilian agency. Of those 107 stars, 27 have been added since 9/11. The vast majority of those in some way related to the fight against terrorism. Each one of those stars represents the ultimate sacrifice of a patriot and serves as a reminder that the men and women who commit to our profession do so knowing that it is a very dangerous one. Some of you may remember the tragedy in Khost, Afghanistan in December 2009. A dozen or so agency officers, many of them moms and dads, were so committed to protecting American lives that they chose to leave the comforts of home and deploy to Khost, which is a small town in eastern Afghanistan, very close to the Pakistan border. There, under harsh and very dangerous conditions, they gathered intelligence crucial to our hunt for al-Qaeda's leaders in Pakistan. On December 30th, 2009, a suicide bomber detonated an explosive vest that took the lives of 7 of those officers. I can tell you from personal experience that it is gut-wrenching when the call comes that one of your own has fallen. I can tell you how hard it is to stand on the tarmac at Dover when the body is returned home. I can tell you how hard it is to meet with grieving family members and colleagues and to attend memorial services and funerals. Director Panetta and I had the honor of representing the agencies at the funerals of all of these officers. Each of them was special, but let me mention 2. The first, for Harold, was in a small town outside of Boston. The funeral mass was beautiful, but what occurred after the mass was truly extraordinary. As we left the church for the cemetery, I saw the first sign of what was to come. A family of 5, a mother, a father, and 3 children standing on their front porch at attention with their hands over their hearts. A few blocks more brought additional people standing on, in driveways, at intersections, and along the road. Families, scout troops, civic groups, and lone individuals. The crowds grew and grew as we got closer to the cemetery. In the 30-minute ride, there were hundreds, perhaps 1,000 Americans standing to honor our officers. They stood in 15-degree weather, holding American flags of differing sizes, many with hands on their hearts, some with signs that simply read, "Thank you for keeping us safe." That same day, very same day, a few hours later, I attended a memorial service in my hometown of Akron, Ohio, for another of our fallen colleagues from Coast. Small world, huh? This officer, Scott, left behind a wife and an unborn daughter, whom Scott and his wife had already decided to name Piper. One of the eulogies was given by a close friend who had served with Scott in the military. At the end of this eulogy, this still serving military officer said that he had a vision of the future. He said that he had a vision of a young woman, her husband, and her children standing in front of the memorial wall in our lobby at CIA. He said that in this vision, this young woman had her hand on as she told her family about Scott, about his life, about his service to his country, his contribution to freedom. He said that in his vision that this young woman, named Piper by her parents, were as proud as she could be of the father that she had never met. So why did I tell you these stories? Because they go to the heart of what motivated me every day, and they go to the heart of what motivates many of the men and women who work at CIA. I used such stories of courage and sacrifice to challenge new officers as I guided them through their oath of office on their very first day. I administered the oath of office to them standing in front of the Morell wall. I asked the new officers to remember the CIA officers who had stars on the wall, and I told them what those stars should mean for them. I told them that those stars mean that everything you do every day must live up to their sacrifice. I told them it's that simple. I told them it's a very tall order, but I also told them that it is one that their colleagues and they will meet every day. Thank you very much for listening. I will take many questions.